like a hot cup of coffee on a minus 45-degree day. I don't think it's that cold, but it's pretty chilly. Anyway, start a new project. This one is Revell's 1/48 scale F-15E Strike Eagle. And this one I'm putting on a base, as usual, on a base in flight with pilots. I am adding pilots. It didn't come with them, so I had to steal them from another kit. And this is not a commission build. I am going to put this one up for sale on eBay, so it'll be a great Valentine's Day gift for your wife or significant other. So I've heard a lot of good things. So far the kit's really nice. It's got a lot of nice detail. It does go together pretty well, surprisingly. And but there's one big issue, and that is the canopy. Canopy's horrible. Just the molding on it is it's got a lot of, I don't know, it's not good. So the first part of this video is me showing you how I remove the seam line along the canopy, and even when I do that, it's still not really that good. But I've never shown that before, so I thought it'd be interesting to show some of you guys how I take care of seam lines and make the canopy all shiny again. Then the second part is how I make the receptacles for my acrylic rod. Sounds kind of weird, doesn't it? Receptacle for my rod in my planes for putting it on my bases, because I get a lot of questions about that, and I know I've touched on it in other videos, but I went a little bit more in depth on this one to show you how it's done, or how I do it. And that should be about it. So let's get on with the video. Now, before we get started with the rest of the video, I kind of want to give you an overview of what I've got done and how the kit looks. Now, it's got some real nice detail, engraved panel lines, and nice rivet detail. I mean, it's a really good looking kit. The fuselage halves, as you'll see later, go together. There's a top half and then a bottom half. And the joins aren't bad. I really didn't do any sanding along this joint. I just glued it. May have a little bit of cleanup, but I think once it gets painted, it'll be fine. Over here, the same thing. And right along here, there really wasn't, the fit was pretty good. You can see I've got a little bit of filler there, but overall, the fit's really good. Now, I did test fit the nose, and it fits in there pretty good so far. Just gonna have to do a little bit of adjusting. They do offer this to be, the landing gear to be closed, so they do also suggest, like a lot of kits, that you can put this into in-flight mode. So the landing gear bays, at least the rear ones, fit really well. I just had to do a little bit of sanding on those, and they fit in there nicely. Other than that, I mean, the fit's really nice. The intakes fit pretty well. I did have to do, obviously, there's seam lines that run along through there, so I did have to fill those in, and the light's really not going to show, but well, I did take care of the seam lines along the intake. The cockpit's really nicely detailed. I mean, look at that. That's some good detail. I did have to trim the bottom of the seats and set them down a little bit lower. They were bumping into the canopy. And then I got my pilots sans legs because I had to do a lot of carving to get these pilots to fit in there nicely. And you're not going to notice that his legs are cut off. So otherwise he wouldn't have fit with the instrument panels and stuff in there. So got those all squared away. These were kind of a pain, the exhaust nozzles. Each one of these little rods were individual, and you had to glue them on. And some of them were kind of bent and broken. There's one here that's bent, and I tried to fix it as best I could. They were, I don't know, it was rather difficult. Other than that, I mean, the exhaust nozzles came in like 3 pieces back here, and they all fit together pretty well. And overall, I mean, it looks like a simple kit to put together. So far, it's been a breeze, but you know, I've only gotten this far. So that's kind of a brief overview of what I've done. And so let's get on with the canopy issue. All right, now here's something I don't always see on 1/48 scale. I found it to be more common on the 1/32 and bigger scales. is a seam line along the top of the canopy. Now, this in particular, I have never seen a seam line this bad, and I don't know if the camera's gonna pick it up, but it is a significant seam line. So yeah, I'm not sure why that is, but you know, and I've built Revell kits before and they've never quite been this bad, but I mean, this is really, really bad. So I thought I would show you how I take care of these. Now I've got a sharp X-Acto blade. You want to try to limit the any deep scratches on your canopies when you do this. So I'm going to start by trying to take down the seam line, and it may take me a bit, but I'm just going to run my X-Acto blade along, and even back here, I don't know if you can, if the camera will pick this up, but there's like a big chunk right here. It's just horrible. Now I don't want to really dig in with my X-Acto blade. Yeah, I'm kind of wary of carving it like that, but so I'm just going to take my X-Acto blade and I'm going to try to remove the seam line as best I can with the X-Acto blade. And my dog's barking. Okay, well, there's a little bit of, I had some sticky tack in here, so there's some remnants of sticky tack on the inside, but I'm not really worried about that. I'll clean that out later. But I've got it all shaved down with the X-Acto blade. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start sanding. And before I sand, I want to cover this metal part that's going to be painted because I don't want to sand down the detail. Now I've got these micro mesh sanding sticks and I really like them. These are kind of worn down, which is you know, not bad. It's just it takes a little bit more work. Now I'm just going to lightly take the coarse, and there's almost like a divot in the top here, so I'm going to try to get as much of that out as I can. Now I probably won't be able to make it look perfect, but you know, it's kind of the hand that I was dealt with. So I'm just going to lightly go back over this, and I am going to put scratches in it. I'm just going to lightly sand this. So I'm just going over with the coarse, and I'm just smoothing this out. Now I don't want to go too far because I don't really want to deform the canopy any more than it already is. But I'm getting right up next to that tape. If I didn't have the tape on here, I'd be obliterating the panel line for that little metal cross piece that goes along there. Now as you can see when I sand this, you can see where the sand with the sanding stick's not hitting. That's the deformity where that seam line was. It kind of like, I guess when the part was molded, that seam line comes up and there's a little bit of a dip. I'm going to try to take that out as best I can, but I really don't want to go too far. But we'll see. Now the glass is pretty thick, so there is a little bit of wiggle room here. So I'm just going to work on this with the heavy sanding stick, and then we'll come back after I get this smoothed out as best I can. Okay, now, I don't seem to be having too much luck with this. It's not real hard, but it is pretty stiff. So what I'm going to try is I've got my F-15E sanding sponge, and it's real spongy and real soft. So that way, when I'm using the sanding stick, I have to constantly go back and forth so I don't get a flat edge. But with this 800 grit sanding sponge, it'll be a little bit easier not to develop flat spots. And I can remove a lot of material, so I'm going to try this to see if I can get that somewhat rounded and uniform. And yeah, I'm going to scratch up a lot more of the window glass, but I'm going to have to polish it anyway, so it kind of is what it is. And again, I want to take off as little amount of material as I can get away with. because I don't want to deform this too much. I just want to bring it back into shape and get rid of that waviness. So I am using an 800 grit. Now if I came here with a 400 grit, I would basically just saw this thing in half within a matter of minutes. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Still a little bit right here. I'll try to come in here and get in tight. Try not to obliterate that panel line. Okay. There we go. Looks like I've got it all uniform, and it doesn't look like I flattened it too much. Now I'm just going to move my tape and run it along to block it from the other side. And I'm going to do the same thing. So I've got my, this is my 800 grit. Get my 800 grit. And then once I'm done with this, then I'll come in and I'll start wet sanding it with these micro mesh sanding sticks that are real fine. Okay, now I've got the material removed that I want removed. So the next thing I'm going to do is work on removing the scratches that I made. And that's where a lot of people run into issues. And it just takes the right tools and a little bit of time. So now I'm going to take my fine micro mesh sanding stick and I'm going to wet this down. And I'm just going to start going over it real lightly. And I'm just trying to remove the scratches. Now I'm not removing material, I'm just sanding out the scratches. And again, I've replaced the tape. And I'm using a little bit of water. I found that water helps you get to a smoother finish faster. Now I've got little micro mesh pads, but in lieu of those, I'm going to use some polishing compound, and I'll show you how that works. Now I've got the ultra fine here, so basically I'm just taking it down and taking it down to the finer grits, and I'm starting to polish out those scratches. Okay, so for this I'm using this turtle wax rubbing compound, and I've got some coarse stuff, which is the kind of a brownish orangish stuff, and then I've got the white stuff. Okay, so I'm just going to take a little bit, put it on my finger, and rub it on the canopy. And then I'm going to take a Dremel tool and I'm not pressing hard. I'm just going to try to get some of those tiny scratches out with this rough stuff. Now I've got this on low. If you've got a Dremel tool or a rotary tool that goes really fast, you want to be careful, because if you go too fast you can melt and burn right into the canopy, and then you're scrapping a canopy. I've done that before. So I keep it on the low speed. It takes a little bit longer, but I'm less apt to burn through it, and I keep it constantly moving. Okay, now I'm going to take a little bit of the white, which is a little bit finer. And I could switch out my buffing wheel, but I'm not worried about it too much, because I'm going to come back with some plastic polish and a loose buffing wheel and give it a shine. Okay, so what I've started doing now, I'm done with the polishing compounds, and I'm using this Meguiar's Plast X. It's a plastic polish, and I'm just going to put a little bit on here. And I've wiped clean. I've already started doing this, but I've wiped clean all the polishing compounds, so I'm not really doing any more material removal. And I got a different polishing wheel. This is a real soft, fluffy one. And I'm just gonna go over it, and I gotta be careful because this will catch pretty easily on the edges. And I'm just gonna polish the rest of this out with the plastic polish and this soft buffing wheel. And this should bring me to a nice, clear, shiny canopy. Okay, there it is, all nice and polished, and the seam line is removed. You can see some distortions in the plastic. It's poor molding quality by Revell. So, is what it is. Just gonna have to live with it. I think once it's on the model, it won't look so bad, but seam line is gone, and we are looking good. So you can see down here, I didn't do any sanding down here, and it's bubbled out a little bit. I could try to remove that, but I think I'm probably just going to cause more harm than good. So there we go, fellas. That's how I remove seam lines on my clear canopies. So let's figure out how I'm going to put this on the base. Now, I've already had a base started, and I actually started this one on my last build, but decided it was too big for the TA-152, so I went with a smaller, rounder base. Now, I've got a hole drilled, and it's just slightly over the size of my 1/4-inch acrylic rod. And it fits in there nice and snug, no wiggle room. And so, what I've done is I'm at the point where I'm ready to close up the fuselage halves, and I figured out that I want it to sit right about here on the base, and I'm going to have it tilted at an angle like so. So what I've done is I've figured out exactly where I want to put it. It's going to go right about here. So I've drilled a hole on the bottom. Now this isn't going to interfere with anything. I've already got the front intakes in. The rear engines only go to about here, so I don't have any issues with that. But what I've done is I found this is actually a straw from Dairy Queen, and it fits in here really nice and snug. Now when you do this, again, this is a 1/4-inch diameter acrylic rod, and it fits into these Dairy Queen straws really well, really snug. It's not too tight, but it doesn't wiggle that much, and that's what I'm looking for. So I've drilled a hole slightly bigger than my Dairy Queen straw, and I'm going to stick it in here like so, through the hole, and I'm going to push it, let's see, push it up like this, and then I will put the fuselage halves together, and I want it to where the straw touches the top of the fuselage when I put it together. So I'll put it together like so, and I'm going to push this in, and it's right about there. It should be touching the top. And I know you can't see it, but it does touch the top right there. So I got that much room. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'll pause the video and I'll get my 5-minute epoxy out. Just a second. Now the 5-minute epoxy that I use is this Bob Smith Industries, and I really like it. And before I start gluing anything down, we'll double check, and if you can see right there, see how the straw meets the top of the fuselage halves right there? That's what I'm looking for. Everything closes up nice and tight. At least it did. There we go. I've got, it'll close up, and that straw is right where I want it to be. So now I'm gonna use the 5-minute epoxy to glue right around the bottom. Okay, so what this is gonna do is really strengthen this straw. Now there's not gonna be much force along the side of it, with the rod going in, but I want to make sure that it's rock solid, and the 5-minute epoxy really reinforces this real thin, flexible, somewhat flexible straw. And I broke my toothpick. So I'm just mixing up my 5-minute epoxy real good. And now I'm gonna just put this around so it's nice and glued down to the base, and I don't have to be really neat with it. Because this epoxy, what it does is it kind of levels out and flows down to the bottom here. So if I put it all the way up here on the top of towards the top of the straw, now I don't want to get any inside of it, but it will flow down and settle, but it will still give me a nice sturdy base for this straw. Now I made the hole really tight so there shouldn't be any epoxy leak through along the bottom. I don't want epoxy to be pouring out of there. So this is a real tight fit. And I've got some metric drill bits that I got from Harbor Freight that come in like 10,000 sizes that I use to get just the right size for my holes whenever I do this. And you can see here that the epoxy is really flowing down. I may, as it dries, I may tilt it up like this and let it flow back down a little bit. It's kind of like a real stiff molasses. Okay, so I'm gonna let this dry, and then once this is dry, then what I'll do is I'll put some more epoxy around the straw, and I'll put these two pieces together and tilt it upside down so the epoxy does the same thing on the other end, and then I should have a real nice space to insert my acrylic rod. Okay, I've got some more epoxy here. I'll go ahead and mix this up real quick. So I got my fresh epoxy. And now the bottom isn't completely cured, but it's not moving much. So we're good to go. Now before we do the next step, you want to make sure that the joins between the fuselage halves are nice and tight, and you don't need to do any more work on them. Now this fits up pretty well. Get that in picture. So I'm not gonna, once I put the epoxy in and close it up, I'm not going to be pulling this apart again. So let's go ahead and put the epoxy on. I'm gonna put it on rather liberally. And I'm just gonna smear it around just like I did before. And again, I don't want to get it along the inside. Okay, just like so. Now, because this is going to go with the force of gravity, I'm going to let it go down. I'm going to put the two halves together right where they need to be. And I'm going to tape these up. So I've got my tape. And I've got my tape on here. I gotta act quick. All right, now I'm gonna hold it upside down and we're gonna watch that epoxy flow back down and glue this to the top. So now I'm holding it upside down, so all that epoxy should flow down and glue my straw to the top half of the fuselage. Now, you don't really need to sit here and watch this go down. So I'm going to let this epoxy flow down and glue that to the top. And then the next step will just be trimming the bottom, this remaining part off with an X-Acto blade, and I should have a nice sturdy mounting hole in which to mount my 1/4 inch acrylic rod. And that's how I do it. So let's take a look at what we got. I glued the top half to the bottom half and cleaned up my joins. Fit pretty well. I'm pretty impressed so far. Now I did trim off the excess straw and made it flush. So I've got a nice flush hole there at the bottom. You can see that. A nice receptacle for my rod. And I cut the acrylic rod down to about half, took a heat gun, heated it up, and then bent it so I have the plane sitting at an angle. And then all I need to do now is just stick it in, plug my plane in, and I should be pretty well set for my base. And it should sit about like that. And I think that will look really cool. What I've got in mind for the base is to paint another rippled flag. I've had a couple people ask me how I paint my bases. So I thought that'd be a good thing to show how I'm doing that. And that should be it for this video. I appreciate you watching, and I will see you on the next episode.